Hello and welcome to Season 5, Episode 15 of Conservation Conversations with BirdLife South Africa. I'm your host, Christina Hagen, coming to you live from Cape Town. We have well over 150 episodes recorded and available on YouTube, so if you've missed out on any of our episodes, you can always catch up on our YouTube channel. Please do subscribe to receive updates when we post. We are on all major social media channels, and you can use the hashtag Conservation Conversations to let us know what you think of the show. We aim to keep these webinars free for all to learn and enjoy. So if you do enjoy the series and can contribute, no matter how small an amount, please do consider donating. You can donate through the BirdLife South Africa webpage at the link on the screen, or you can scan the QR code to take you directly there. Otherwise, you are also welcome to EFT BirdLife South Africa directly and use the reference webinars and your name. And we're so grateful to those of you who do continue to support us. So for the last couple of months, we have been running a donation competition, with the prize being a copy of The Ultimate Companion to Birding in Southern Africa. And we actually have 2 of those books to give away, thanks to Peter and Irene Ginn. Thank you very much for the very generous donations of these prizes. So I did a random draw earlier today from the people who donated at least 100 Rand over June and July. And I'm pleased to announce the winners are Alan Hurwitz and John and Ann Todd. Congratulations. And I will be in touch with you shortly about getting your books to you. And thank you very much to everyone who donated during this time. Now the annual BirdLife South Africa raffle is live. You can stand a chance to win an 8-day, 7-night birding trip for 2 to Brazil. Absolute bucket list destination. So please visit our website, www.birdlife.org.za/raffle for more details. Now, tonight we are joined by my colleague, Eleanor Weideman, who will be talking about her work to develop automated penguin monitoring systems. So Eleanor's work at BirdLife South Africa focuses on using tracking data from endangered African penguins, Cape cormorants, and Cape gannets to inform an ecosystem approach to fisheries management and marine spatial planning initiatives. She is part of the team who developed and installed the 4 automated penguin monitoring systems at penguin colonies around South Africa, and she currently manages the project, and that is what she'll be sharing with us this evening. She holds an MSc from the Fitzpatrick Institute of African Ornithology and has overwintered on Marion Island conducting research on the effects of invasive mice and climate change on albatrosses, petrels, and several species of avian scavengers. She's also published several papers on sources and sinks of marine litter in South Africa. So Eleanor, we're very pleased to have you on the show tonight. You can start sharing your screen and get going with your talk.
Thanks, Christina, for the introduction, and thank you to everyone for joining us this evening. This is a project that I am very passionate about and very excited to share with you all. Just to start off with, to say that BirdLife South Africa is definitely not working alone on this project. It is a collaboration with SANCOB and Nelson Mandela University, and has been funded by MassMart, the Charles van der Merwe Trust, Saving Animals from Extinction, and the University of Exeter. So thank you to all our collaborators and funders for all your ongoing support. There we go. So to start off with, I wanted to put penguins in context. When I typed in African penguin on an AI image generator, the round image on the left is the first image that popped up. So you can see this cute, almost fluffy looking bird with these big eyes, standing on a beach and staring up innocently at the viewer. And this really couldn't be further from the truth. I have many scars from African penguins. And also when you type in penguin into Google image search, it is predominantly photos of penguins on land. Most of them are of the cute, fluffy chicks, and a lot of them are of penguins waddling very clumsily over the land and falling over. And it's this idea of these birds being cute, waddling balls of fluff that has really cemented itself into the eye of the public. But it really could not be further from the truth, and it's really at sea where these birds come into their own. They are very well described as fish birds because they have some incredible adaptations for a life at sea. And this video, taken from an animal-borne video camera on an African penguin at Stony Point, shows a group of African penguins foraging on a ball of anchovy and sardine. And you can just see how incredibly well adapted they are to this lifestyle. They have a torpedo-like body shape, scale-like feathers that make them extremely aerodynamic, and their short paddle-like wings help them to essentially fly through the water. And they evolved these adaptations so that they could exploit these underutilized niches within the marine environment, and to be able to get to food sources that are not available to other flying birds. There are, however, costs to this choice of lifestyle. The main problem is that it's very energetically costly to swim or basically fly in the water, because water is so much more dense than air. And so penguins are very much constrained in terms of how far they can go to find food. As an example, a wandering albatross can leave its nest and cover hundreds, if not thousands, of kilometers at sea, finding food for its chick. Whereas a penguin can go, it depends on the species, an African penguin can go normally about 40 kilometers away from its nest before it has to return to feed its chick. And this constraint on how far a penguin can swim has really shaped where we find them in the world. So you only find penguins living in normally cold water and very nutrient-dense waters with reliable sources of prey. In the breeding season, penguins operate as what we call central place foragers, and this map illustrates this. So these are GPS tracks from penguins breeding at Stony Point, and you can see they leave their colony, go to sea, forage very quickly, forage, and then return back. So this is what it means to be a central place forager. And because of all these constraints and this high energy required to fly in the water, penguins are very sensitive to changes in the preyscape, or the abundance and distribution of prey around their colonies. And this can lead to competition for the same resources if there are other predators eating the same prey as the penguins within this area around the penguin breeding colonies. The African penguin is a prime example of this. So the African penguin is found, or is only found, in the Benguela upwelling ecosystem along the coast of Namibia, the west coast, west, south, and a bit of the east coast in South Africa. And these waters, as with all other penguins, are cold, and it's an upwelling ecosystem. So cold bottom water is upwelled, bringing with it nutrients. And this gives rise to this this is a simplified example, but this kind of food web where you have these dense blooms of phytoplankton that are then fed upon by your schooling fish, such as anchovy and sardine, which are a highly nutrient-dense species of prey, and you get several top predators that feed on these fish, including the African penguin, but also your predatory larger fish and Cape fur seals. And because African penguins are so specialized, they're one of the most specialized species of penguin in the world, their population trajectories are very much mirrored. The population trajectories of the penguin mirror the population trajectories of the fish. So in South Africa, the populations of anchovy and sardine, which are shown in this graph by the blue and green bars, have decreased since the turn of the century. And as you can see, the African penguin, shown by the black line, has also declined. The African penguin was listed as endangered in 2010, and it now meets the criteria to be listed as critically endangered, which is extremely worrying, as it means that it has a very high chance of going extinct in the wild. And so what we really want to understand with this project and with a lot of the research that we do is trying to figure out what kind of choices are penguins making in the breeding season, and how can we better understand this to try to conserve them better. So a penguin with a small chick needs to feed both the chick while also maintaining its own body condition. So it needs to find quite a lot of food around its breeding colony. And they can make different choices and try different foraging strategies. So for example, they could spend more time at sea trying to find food and do longer foraging trips, or they could try to do more frequent, shorter foraging trips and come back very quickly to try to conserve energy. But ultimately, if there's not enough food around the breeding colonies, a long-lived seabird, including penguins, will prioritize their own survival and will abandon their breeding attempts. And so the way that these birds change these foraging strategies in relation to the conditions at sea make them really good indicators of ecosystem health, because we can monitor and study these changes and then get an idea of what's happening around the breeding colonies. So this is where the automated penguin monitoring systems come in. These systems help us to study these changes in the strategies of the penguins. They consist of a scale or two scales that weigh the penguins as they leave their colony and when they come back. And then there's also a tag reader that picks up the individual tags of the birds. And so you can get a very good idea of how much food that birds are able to find by how their mass changes over time. And then also using the tag IDs, you can see how often the birds are going to forage and for how long they are foraging. And this data, and this is the real key of the project, is that this data is collected in almost real time. So on a daily scale, compared to in the past, before these systems were developed, scientists would go in and measure chicks and adults once, twice, or three times during the breeding season. Now we're weighing the adults every single day. So it can give really great insights into how the birds are finding food. And these are timescales that are much more conducive to effective management of the at-sea environments around the penguin colonies. These systems have been developed for other species of penguin in the world. So it started with the Adelie penguins in Antarctica. There's been extensive use of these systems to study little penguins in Australia, some fascinating research coming out there, and also macaroni penguins in South Georgia. And so we have adapted the systems that have been used for other species to work specifically for the African penguin. The idea of this project and the idea to use it in South Africa was started by Alistair McInnes during his postdoc at Nelson Mandela University. He's now the Seabird Conservation Program Manager at BirdLife South Africa. And he worked with Justin Peed and Robin Farinda, who are from the engineering department at UCT, to design the first prototype of the system. And the initial testing happened at Sandcob and the Two Oceans Aquarium. And I'll show you this very cute video of the hand. You can see the handler enticing the penguins walk over the scales so that the engineers can see whether the system is suitable for this particular species. Oops, sorry, there you go. Once they had designed the prototype, they installed the first system on St. Croix Island, close in Algoa Bay in the Eastern Cape. And here's some pictures of it. The prototype had a single scale, which you can see by the smaller dark brown square, and then the pit reader is the open square. The first system was either washed away or stolen, we're not sure, but they did install a second system and got quite nice data from it. However, the colony at St. Croix then crashed, and so we've not been allowed back onto the island because we don't want to cause disturbance. So we don't currently have a system working on St. Croix Island. But once this initial prototype had been designed, we really needed to find seed funding to help get the project off the ground, because Justin and Robin were doing this in their spare time. And so we really needed someone to work full-time on the project. And that is where MassSmart came in. They provided the original seed funding for the project, and we're really grateful to them. And with their funding, we were able to hire electronics engineer Pierre Retief, who's not going to be happy that I put a photo of him in here. Sorry, Pierre. But he has really been instrumental in getting the project to where it is now. He worked on the original prototype and developed it to what it is now. And even though he now has a full-time job in the Netherlands, he is still always on call and willing to help. So we're really grateful to him. So last year, after a lot of work behind the scenes, we were lucky enough to spend a month in the field installing these newly designed systems. We had a great trip. Definitely overcame some challenges, including transformers in the mountain being blown down, power cuts for weeks on end. At the bottom right-hand corner, you can see Pierre trying to solder wires together in the rain under his rain jackets. So we really had a great time, some great adventures. And we successfully installed 4 systems around South Africa, from which we are now getting live data from, which is very exciting. This is a map just to show where these systems are. So Massmart provided funding to do Stony Point and Bird Island. Saving Animals from Extinction then came on board to sponsor Dyer Island, and the University of Exeter sponsored one on Robben Island. So together, these 4 systems give us a great spread of data from around South Africa. And these are at 4 of the 6 remaining large colonies of African penguins. So we're really gaining great insight into what's happening with this iconic seabird. This is just an example, photos of what the systems look like. So we decided to, instead of just using 1 scale, we put in 2 scales. And this helps us to, we essentially weigh the bird twice. So it just increases our accuracy. If the weights from the 2 scales are more than 100 grams different, we don't use the data. So it's just a way of making sure that our system is accurate. You can see the RFID tag reader, which picks up the individual tags of the birds. And then these systems are out in the elements day in, day out. So we really needed proper waterproof housing for the electronics. And then there's a Wi-Fi router. So we can log into the system remotely, and the data is sent to the Amazon cloud every night, which is really exciting. And then this is just a video to show this is the system at Stony Point, just a few days after we installed it. I mean, you can see the penguins are still a bit hesitant, but suddenly pick up the courage and then cross the scales. And it always makes me really happy to see this. It always brings a smile to my face. And now that the systems have been in the colony for many, many, many months now, the birds are very used to the systems and don't hesitate as much as they did initially. So it's always great to see that. And then, because these systems are in quite remote places, difficult and expensive to get to some of the island colonies, we really wanted to be able to monitor the systems remotely. So Pierre designed a dashboard that updates every night, and I can come into the office with my morning cup of coffee and log in and see what's happening at our sites. So it gives kind of diagnostic information of, you know, the voltages of the most important electronic parts. I can see how much storage is available on site, what the temperature inside the electronics box is, all these kind of things that are important to know. And if something goes wrong, we can pick that up quickly, and we can go prepared to the island to fix it. Along the bottom panel, you can start to see some of the data we're getting. So you can see the total number of penguins crossing. This is anything from, I don't know, 50 or 60 birds a day at Robben Island up to almost 300 at Bird Island, which are incredible sample sizes. We're getting anything from 10 to 30 individual tags, which is also great. And you can start to see the daily weight of the birds heading out and coming back. The first kind of proof of concept was to see whether the system was showing the birds heavier when they were coming back than when they were leaving. And it did, so that was a big sigh of relief when we saw that. Yeah, we were very, very happy to see that the system did look like it was working. And then also on the right-hand side, the little gray box, if I'm not around or can't access my computer, I can also SMS the system. So Peer installed a SIM module, and that gives kind of a summarized report of what the systems are looking like. So we can always be in touch with our systems and see what's happening, which is very important for a project where we are trying to get data at as fine a time scale as possible. Now that we've installed these systems and we're getting this amazing data, we now are moving on to the second phase of the project and looking to the future. The second phase of the project is quite a big part of it. Still a lot of work to be done on this, and this is essentially calibrating the system both to the movement of the birds and also to the ecological conditions. So starting with the movement of the birds, in an ideal world, you can see a photo there from a zoo where they're weighing their penguins. In an ideal world, you know, our African penguins would very nicely stand on the scale and let us see the weight and then go off to sea. But that's not what happens. They often run across or, you know, walk on and turn around and go back, or walk in big groups. So we really need to start to test whether our algorithm that extracts the weight of the penguins as they move over the scale is accurate. Other systems that were done for other species of penguin that are not critically endangered, what they would do is, as soon as a bird had crossed the scales, they would go and catch the bird and then manually weigh it, similar to what's shown from the London Zoo in the corner. But because our penguins are almost critically endangered, we can definitely not be running through the colony trying to catch birds. That would definitely not fly. So what we rather do is we put up a third scale. So this is a video, I'll play it now. At the back, we have our permanent scales that are part of the APMS, and we then put up a third temporary scale that has a screen. And as the bird walks onto the third scale, we can see from the screen what its true weight is, and then compare that to what our algorithm predicted from the permanent scales. So this is just a video to show there the bird crosses the APMS, the algorithm is working in the background to extract its weight, and then the bird, we can pause the video and then see the bird weighs about 2.8 kilograms, and we can then compare back to what the APMS predicted. And we're currently collecting this data, and so far so good. It's looking like we're within about 50-gram accuracy, which is what we really wanted to get to. And I mean, these birds can put on, you know, 400 or 600 grams under good foraging conditions. So within 50-gram accuracy is really great, and we were really happy with that. But I will be going through a lot of videos over the next few months. We're hoping to publish this soon. Then once we've calibrated it to the movement of the penguins, we want to start calibrating it to the ecological conditions around the colony. So we want to essentially see, are the APMSs showing us what is happening at sea? Are they picking up these changes in the availability of prey? So the first step to do this is through biologger deployments. These are small loggers. They don't weigh much. They have a very aerodynamic shape, so they don't affect the bird when it goes to forage. You can see in the photo there, we tape the logger to the back feathers of the bird, and leave the logger out for a day before we remove it. So it really has minimal impact on the bird. And what these loggers measure is they have built-in accelerometers, so we can measure how the bird is moving in 3D space. And from that, you can use machine learning to predict how much fish the bird is catching. So a lot of work needs to go into that still for African penguins. The biologgers also then measure the diving and the GPS position of the bird. So you can start to see how the bird is moving both horizontally, but also vertically. And when you combine all of these different types of measurements, you can develop energy expenditure metrics. So we can start to see how much energy is the bird spending at sea versus how much fish are they actually catching and how much energy are they taking in. And so by comparing that then to the APMS, we can start to see, is the APMS picking up these changes in weight, and is that reflective of how much energy they're spending at sea? The second part of this ecological calibration is to do fish surveys. So we are currently looking for funding for this. Essentially, what we want to see is, how do these schools of fish move through the system, and how do the birds pick up on those natural fluctuations in the availability of fish? So how we do this is, we can put an echo logger on a small boat, and then you basically do transects throughout the foraging range of the penguins. This has been done in Australia. So in the middle map, the jagged orange lines are the GPS tracks of little penguins, and then the horizontal black lines are the transects done by the boat with the echologger. And so they're measuring where the fish is, how patchy is it, how big are the patches, how fast are the patches moving, and then comparing that to how the birds are foraging and how the birds are tracking those changes. And so when you combine those two kinds of things, so the biologger deployment data and then the fish survey data, we can start to figure out what are the thresholds in the forest, in the habitat. What are the thresholds in the availability of prey after which the birds cannot find enough food to maintain their own body condition and their chicks as well. And this is taking us right back to the beginning of the talk, where I explained how birds are limited, especially penguins are limited in how far they can go and how deep and how often they can dive. So we want to look at this interaction between the movement of the birds and the natural fluctuations in their prey. We can then compare this to the APMSs. So once we've figured out what those thresholds are, we can start to ask questions of, do the APMSs actually reflect these thresholds? And once we figure that out, we can then start bringing in or comparing the APMS outputs to the breeding success of the birds. So if the APMS is showing that the birds are doing very poorly, how does that affect the breeding success of the birds? And therefore, how does that affect right through to the population trajectory of the species? And this is, as you can imagine, going to be a lot of work over the next few years. But we're very excited to move on to this next phase of the project. And kind of once we've looked at these natural variations within the ecosystem, we can start to then also bring in anthropogenic pressures. So, for example, start to look at if there's a lot of fishing around the colony, how does that disrupt these natural interactions, and does the APMS reflect that? And it's these thresholds that we're trying to figure out that are the key points from a management and from a conservation point of view. If we can show that our APMSs do reflect these thresholds, and because these APMSs are collecting data on an almost real-time scale, we can start to alert management authorities to issues at the colonies at timescales that are much more conducive to actually trying to fix these problems. And as an example of this, there is a lot of ongoing debate about fishing closures around African penguin colonies, and I definitely won't go into the details of this. We have given webinars on this in the past. But just to say that there has been an international panel that has said that closures to fishing around African penguin colonies does benefit the African penguin and benefit their population trajectory. So if we now have APMSs collecting data at real time, we can really start to test whether fishing closures are effective and how can we improve them going forward. We also want these systems to help generate more awareness about the plight of the African penguin, and to be like a real eye-opening tool into how the birds are doing in real time, and to be an educational tool. So again, with the very generous help of MassMart, we have developed a website for the project. So it's called Penguin Alert. and the URL is penguinalert.org. And the website gives the background of the project, explains why we're doing it, how we did it, and then it gives some live data from the different sites in South Africa. So you can log in and see how the birds are doing. In the future, we definitely want to expand this website to also include more educational material, to help us raise awareness with school kids, to explain to children from a young age why penguins and why the marine world is important and why we need to protect it. So again, lots of work to do on the website as well in the future. And then just to end off, because I've been talking for a long time now, so we can almost hand over to questions, but just to leave you with kind of a thought experiment of looking into the future. We've now developed, or on the way to developing, these amazing conservation management, passive monitoring tools for the African penguin. But imagine we can expand it to other species as well in South Africa. The Cape gannets and Cape cormorants are also endemic to the Benguela upwelling ecosystem. They feed on the same prey species as African penguin, but they breed at different times of year. So it would be incredible one day to develop another, it would have to be, it couldn't be Weybridge, but some sort of passive monitoring system to also monitor in real time Cape gannets and Cape cormorants. And I definitely envision one day we can have a huge NASA-like wall with screens of real-time data on how well all our birds are doing. So that would be amazing into the future. So just to end off, to say a huge thank you again to our collaborators and funders, and also shout out to the colony managers. The guys at DFFE, Sandparks, and Cape Nature have really been so helpful with this project. The rangers have given a lot of their time. I often phone them and I'm pulling my hair out, like, something's wrong with the system, please go check it. And they always jump up and go do it. So a huge thank you to everyone involved. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Eleanor. That was great. And you explained what is a complex process very simply. And I'm sure everyone understood very clearly what you had to say. So thank you very much. We do have quite a few questions coming in. So if any of our viewers think of any as we are answering the first few, please do put them in the Q&A box. Please don't put them in the chat box because it's quite hard to keep track of them there. Please do put them in the Q&A feed. But before we answer the questions, just a reminder to everyone that we'll be back in 2 weeks' time with another episode. And this time it will be those special South African Bird Fair episodes that I mentioned at the very beginning. We'll be having the first one on the Tuesday evening, and then 2 more, one on the Wednesday and then the Thursday of that week, which is the 20th to the 22nd of August. So just a reminder that if you have registered for the Conservation Conversation webinars, which everyone here has, you are automatically registered for those 3 webinars. So please do join us for that. Okay, Eleanor, there's quite a few questions coming in, but we'll start with one from your mom. Asking, saying, exciting work, Eleanor. Exactly how do you manage to tag a whole colony?
That is a great question. The African penguin is quite unique in that it doesn't, they don't breed in one big colony. So for example, some of the Antarctic and subantarctic penguins, you get these huge colonies of macaroni penguins that all go through one route. African penguins don't make life as easy as that for us. So we don't tag the whole colony at all. But we are trying to get as high a proportion of the population as possible. Even if we're not tagging, the whole population, even a sample of, I don't know, 20 or 30 tagged birds crossing the Weybridge every single day or every few days can give incredible insight. I mean, that's, in terms of a stats question, that is an incredible sample size. Yeah, so not the whole colony, unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely. But it is amazing to see the sample sizes that you've been getting, which is so much more than we would be able to if, you know, we were physically able to go out and weigh all these penguins. We wouldn't be able to do that many at all, and ethically it wouldn't be right to do that. So now a question from Pamela Isdell, who is my donor, as you know, to supporting the work that I'm doing at De Hoop. And so she's asking whether it's possible to install one of these at De Hoop. And just for those who don't know, we are working at the De Hoop Nature Reserve to try and establish a new breeding colony of African penguins there. So Eleanor, maybe we can go there and install one of your APMSs one day.
Yes, that would be great. But let's let your colony grow a bit bigger first.
Yeah.
Early days.
Yeah, I think it's definitely something that I have on the radar. We have a reader for now, but one day we can augment that with some scales as well. So we have a question from Rob Simmons asking, are you able to look at weight gains of the penguins foraging inside and outside protected areas, or before and after the promulgation of MPAs?
That's a really good question. In terms of looking at weights of penguins foraging inside and outside, that's quite difficult to do. Because the species is so critically endangered, or almost critically endangered, we have very small samples of loggers that we can deploy just to minimize disturbance. And so it's very difficult, almost impossible, to know where the birds crossing the scales are foraging. However, because we have been now getting data for almost a year from some sites, we are going to try see if the extent of, for example, fish enclosures changes, then we can start to look at before and after effects. Yeah, we can also look at the differences between different colonies as well. So if a colony has better protection from certain threats, we can compare that to a colony that has better or less protection.
Great, thanks for that. Ineke Huggins asks, do African penguins get caught in trawling nets, or I guess any kind of fishing nets?
I mean, Christina, you're probably better placed to answer that. There has been some talk on whether they're getting caught in illegal gill nets, but it's a very difficult, there has been some evidence of this, but it is quite difficult to quantify that because it is an illegal fishery. In terms of trawling specifically, I personally have not heard of that, but Christina, maybe you know of an instance of that.
Yeah, no, same. I think they're at very, very low risk of being caught in trawl nets because they wouldn't be going for the discards the way that other seabirds like albatrosses and petrels would do. And it seems like penguins generally avoid fishing vessels, kind of, you know, just overall, no matter what they are. So I think they're very low risk of getting caught in trawl nets. Then Eddie asks, how do penguins navigate when out at sea? Their eyes are but a few centimeters above the water, and they cannot see the shoreline. But I don't know, I think we might differ with that interpretation. But Eleanor, what do we know about how they navigate?
That is a great question.
Yeah.
And there are many papers and books written about this. I think there's still a lot that we don't know. I mean, it would be amazing to spend the day inside in the brain of a penguin. I would definitely sign up for that experience. But they use a whole host of senses to navigate at sea. In terms of just finding fish, they can smell fish. Dimethyl sulfide, I think, is the chemical. So there has been experiments to show that they can smell that, which is the smell of fish. They can find fish by smell. they also take cues from other birds. So if they see, for example, Cape gannets or Cape cormorants flying in a very directional way, they can follow them. And there is an amazing project going on at the moment called AFNAP, which is the Acoustic Foraging Network in African Penguins. It's being led by a French researcher, Andrea Theobald, and she is looking at how these penguins communicate at sea. And she has shown that they have a whole lot of different calls at sea. And yeah, essentially trying to figure out how this network of calls work in terms of telling each other where the fish is, because they do work together to corral these schools of fish up to the surface. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. They also, when they're heading back to the colony, they'll do what's called porpoising. So they'll swim really fast and really directionally, and they'll jump out of the water like a dolphin. And I do wonder if that is that they can see the colony and navigate according to the landscape.
Yeah. And from the camera footage, or the cameras that we put on the backs of penguins, they do seem to often stick their heads up and kind of look around. So I think they can recognize the shoreline and the shape of the coastline. On to another question from Neil, who's asking or saying, I'm always surprised how close you can get to see the penguins at boulders. Does this affect them in any way?
Yeah, I was at Boulders last week, and there were several children sticking their hands right over the fences. I think there is a degree of human disturbance, and it's definitely as as scientists and researchers, and I know the managing authorities also, we do try and minimize our disturbance in the colonies. There have been studies from little penguins in Australia showing that there is an effect of tourism on birds and causing disturbance. But I think if it was a huge disturbance, we would have seen a more dramatic decline in the populations, such as at Stony Point and Boulders Beach, where there is a lot of tourism. Yeah, so the birds do come back and they still keep breeding. So I think there is some disturbance, and whenever I see people getting too close, I do tell them, like, no, move away. The bird's going to bite you. Yeah, but in terms of the biggest threat to African penguins, I don't think that's one of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is evidence that the penguins get habituated to disturbance. And I think the fact that there are the boardwalks does help the penguins kind of have a boundary, so they know where the people are likely to be. There's a question from Shashi saying, do the algorithms monitor attrition of the penguin population due to age, predation, local disasters, etc.?
Yes, to some of that. There have been amazing studies coming out of some of the weighbridges in other parts of the world that have been running for a lot longer. They have, almost decades worth of data now. And they have been able to show with that data and using the tagged birds how they can change their foraging and strategies over their lifespan. Especially if you combine that with biologger deployment. So if you deploy loggers on known age birds, you can start to show that they do start to senesce at a certain age. So they, lose the ability as they get older. As with humans, we definitely lose functioning as we get older. So they can, as they get older, they stop being able to dive as deep and as frequently, just as an example. Yeah. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, thanks. I think it did. Trevor asks, what is the cost of a set of reader and scales?
When we installed them, I think it came to about 100,000 Rand for all the electronics. Yeah, that's kind of a ballpark figure.
Thanks for that. Alistair Stalker is asking a question that I might just answer quickly, asking what is the situation with the legal action against the Minister of the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment. So Alistair, yes, it is sub judice. So we won't say that much about it, but we do have a hearing date for October. So we will know what's happening then, and we'll be able to share more details after the hearing. Hilton says, it's not really a question, but well, it is kind of a question, asking for more details about the mating system of penguins and the seasonality and timing. Maybe you can just say a little bit about that.
So I did actually have slides showing that, but then my talk was a bit long. So the African penguins do have quite a protracted breeding cycle. So you'll, at any given colony, you will normally have birds breeding kind of throughout the year. But generally they are winter breeders. So the peak of the breeding will normally happen in winter, though this does differ between different colonies. Yeah, peak can be in different months of the year. And essentially they will come to land and pair up. They do tend to stay with the same partners for long periods of time. And they'll spend about 2 weeks, you know, pairing up again, mating and building their nest. They'll then lay an egg, which they incubate for quite a long time. It's over a month, I think anything from 30 to 40 days. And while they're incubating, the male and female will swap incubation shifts. So they'll do, when the one goes out to find food for itself, then the other one will incubate the egg, and then they swap duties. Once the chick hatches, again, it's a long time that they're feeding that chick, up to, I think, about 3 months. So when the chick is small, like very or small and still being brooded, the adults will do shorter foraging trips, and again swap duties. But as the chick gets older, both parents will start to go out at the same time, because the chick obviously needs more and more food as it gets older. And then when the chick loses all of its down feathers, is what we call a blue, and it will eventually leave the nest. And the adult birds then go on a pre-molting foraging trip. So they'll spend a few weeks at sea trying to get really fat. They need to put on like 30% of their body weight, because they then come to land and molt. It's called a catastrophic molt. So they lose all of their feathers in one go and have to regrow all their feathers. And during this about a 3-week period, they are confined to land. So they don't feed at all for 3 weeks. And once they've molted, they then go out to sea and they have to replenish all those fat reserves again. If conditions are good, a pair can raise more than one clutch of eggs in a season. And that's one of the reasons why, if, for example, the fish stocks increase, you do see the penguins following that increase very quickly, because if conditions are good, they can successfully raise quite a few young. Yeah,
great answer. A brief little snapshot of the life cycle of the penguins. Great, thank you. Charlene asks, are there any big discrepancies in the weights of the penguins between colonies, and is there a colony based on this that you're most concerned about?
Yes. We are seeing quite a big difference between the Western Cape colonies, so Robin, Stony and Dyer, compared to Bird Island, which is in the Eastern Cape. Bird Island it's the most remote colony, and there's not a lot of anthropogenic activity around the colony. And we're seeing that the birds are quite a lot fatter. When they're coming back, they're weighing anything around about like 3.5, 3.6 kilograms. Whereas at the Western Cape colonies, they're rarely skinny. You can actually visually see it when you go to the colonies. They're coming back only at like, I don't know, 3 or 3.1 kilos, which is really light. Their outgoing weight is also much more consistent than at Bird Island. which to me really indicates that in these Western Cape colonies, the birds are really pushing the limit, like they're really going down to the bare minimum that they can in terms of their own condition before trying to go out to find more food. So we're already picking up quite a big difference. But over the next few years, we'll be looking in much more detail into the data that we're getting.
Yeah, great. So Eleanor and I share an office, and so I often look at her dashboard computer that's sitting there, and it's very interesting to see that the penguins at Bird Island generally only go to sea, leave the colony when they're about 3 kilos, whereas on the west coast the birds are coming back at 3 kilos. So there's, you know, quite a big discrepancy between Bird Island and the west coast, as Eleanor said. So, question from David asking, does Perleman poaching affect penguins? I don't know if you have any insights in this, otherwise I can answer.
I've seen Perleman poached at Stony Point, but I've never actually thought about how they're affecting penguins. So you go, Christina.
I think it's just a matter of disturbance. So the poachers can walk through the colony, and they won't necessarily be mindful of the fact that they're endangered animals, or even care or know about that. And so I think it's only a problem at certain colonies like Stony and Dyer Island. As to the effect size, I'm not sure, but yeah, they can cause disturbance as far as I know. Gerlinda asks, why is there no colony in West Coast National Park or in kind of that area?
There is a colony at Dassin Island, which is quite close, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It used to be one of the biggest colonies in South Africa, so it does have a really high carrying capacity. But just like all the colonies, it has declined quite dramatically over the last few years. But yeah, there is a penguin colony there. There used to also be a lot more colonies in South Africa. I think there used to be something like 25 breeding localities. But yeah, fact check me with that exact number. And quite a few of those were on the West Coast. But yeah, currently the biggest remaining colonies on the West Coast are Dassin Island, close to Saldanha, and then Robben Island.
Yeah. I think there were 28 colonies spread across South Africa and Namibia. And I always forget the split between the two countries. And the penguins did breed on some of the Saldanha Bay Islands like Jutton and Vondeling, but those colonies are down to sort of 10 or so breeding pairs. So unfortunately, they're kind of on their way out, or maybe it's a bit more than that. I forget the exact numbers. But yeah, it's to do with the fish population or abundance and distribution that has changed and makes it harder for penguins on the west coast. Yeah. A question from Ian saying, I know it's not ideal, but what are the possibilities and effectiveness of captive breeding?
The controversial question.
Sorry.
It is something that we have discussed at our government working groups, because there is a large population of penguins in captivity around the world. I think the African penguin is actually one of the most numerous in terms of captive penguins in zoos and aquariums. The biggest problem with that is that there has been inbreeding. So zoos have in the past kept African penguins with their closely related Humboldt and Magellanic penguins, which look very similar, but they are very distinct species. And so there has been inbreeding between these, and so we definitely cannot release any of those offspring into the wild. That would basically be playing God with penguins, and we don't want to do that. Yeah, I think if it was ever considered, it would be a very, very, very last resort. Like, we do not want to get there to that point at all.
Yeah, just to add a little bit to that, so African penguins breed really well in captivity, and a lot of captive institutions are actually trying to stop their birds from breeding, because otherwise they'll be overpopulated. So there is currently a process underway to look at a risk assessment to see what it would be like, what the risks would be to releasing captive bred birds. But obviously it would have to be from known origin, very carefully tracked genetics, so that the facilities would need to keep track of who is breeding with who, and make sure that the genetics weren't going to be a problem. But yeah, as Eleanor says, it's not really somewhere that we want to be. And there's also kind of a moral, ethical question of putting birds out into an environment where they might not survive, if you've specifically bred them when they wouldn't have existed otherwise. So it's all sorts of questions that need to be answered before or if that happens. Well, we're almost at 8 o'clock, so we'll just go through a couple more questions. Another one from Charlene, saying, can you use this? And I assume by this she means the APMS, to track the progress and growth of chicks.
Not the way it's currently designed. So we can look at fledging mass. So the first time that a fledgling crosses the weighbridge, and that is one of the questions that we do want to look at in detail, is how does the fledgling mass affect the bird's life, basically. There has been some research done looking, but that was specifically for the adults, putting scales just outside the nests. But in terms of the chicks, it would be very difficult. So we're rather looking at the changes in the weight of the adults and how that relates to the chicks. So there is the rangers and managing authorities do an excellent job of doing breeding success checks at regular intervals in the breeding season. So they'll go and they'll monitor the progress of the chicks. So they'll, the age of the chicks, they do chick condition at certain times in the year. And so we can relate that data to the data from the adults from the APMS. But yeah, because the chicks stay within their nest, it would be very difficult to install something like this to measure the chicks.
Yeah. Yeah, it'd be great if you could have a little scale in each nest, but the practicalities of that are, I think, a little bit too much beyond us. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce his name, but Joe Henschel asks about gannets and cormorants and how they interact or possibly compete with African penguins out at sea.
That's also a very good question. Competition between seabirds is a huge field of study, a field of research. We have a PhD student who's just started, she's called Tegan Walker, and she's going to be looking at all of our tracking data from Cape gannets and African penguins, both in the breeding season and non-breeding season, to see how they overlap and what interactions there are between the species. But overall, the three different species breed at different times of the year, or at least the peak breedings at different times of the year. So there is kind of temporal, there's a biological word for it, but I can't remember it. There's like a temporal separation in the peaks of their breeding season, which minimizes competition. But definitely competition would increase as prey becomes more scarce. But whether that's actually been shown for these seabirds, I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. And the African penguins actually help the gannets and the cormorants by elevating the schools and bringing them closer to the surface, because the penguins can dive a lot deeper than the gannets and the cormorants can. So they actually assist the flying birds by elevating the schools closer to the surface. So we'll just answer one last question. And this is quite I always find this one quite difficult to answer because to me it's sort of self-evident, but an anonymous attendee has asked, why is it important to save the African penguin? So why are you doing this, Eleanor? What is your reason?
I can write a whole book about that. I mean, I do get quite frustrated when we have to justify why we're trying to save something. So I do think every species has inherent value and every species should be saved, just because it has evolved and is incredible. If we have to justify it, I don't know, from like an ecosystem perspective, as Christina said, African penguins are considered ecosystem engineers. So they do elevate schools of fish to the surface. And without that happening, those schools won't be available to the flying species. I mean, there's whole books written on why seabirds are important in terms of nutrient cycling, bringing nutrients onto land. Yeah, I mean, Christina, you can also jump on that, but really, I mean, they're Africa's only, or mainland Africa's only species of penguin. Like, why wouldn't we want to save them? So, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. I think for me, we kind of have a responsibility because they're only found here. And a lot of the reason that they are in trouble is because of humans. So I feel that we have a responsibility to try and undo some of the damage that has been done in the past, and to save them. And also, we don't know what kind of knock-on impacts different species going extinct will have. It's the ecosystem functions through a very complex web of connections, and I always think of it like a tower of Jenga, and you start taking out blocks. At some point, the whole system's going to collapse, and then, kind of just from a selfish point of view, humans will also suffer from that. So I think it's imperative that we try and save African penguins, but also all the other species that we can. So on that note, I think we'll leave it there. Yeah, thank you so much, Eleanor, for sharing your time and the work that you're doing. There's been a lot of lovely messages coming through in the chat complimenting your work, so I'll share those with you later if you haven't had a chance to read them now. And yeah, thank you to all our viewers for joining us for Conservation Conversations. And yeah, I don't know, Eleanor, is there anything final you'd like to share with us before we close out for the evening?
No, just thank you to everyone for joining. Yeah, it's a project I'm really passionate about. So I'm glad that you guys seem to have enjoyed it. So thank you very much for joining in tonight.
Absolutely. It was a great webinar. So thank you very much. And yeah, thanks again to all our viewers, and please do join us again in 2 weeks' time. And good night.
Bye, everyone.